Let's talk about wide receivers that you should start or sit in week 7 of the fantasy football season. We have got the Ravens and the Bills on bye. No Zay Flowers, Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir. But don't worry, I'm going to go through all 15 matchups, 30 teams in total. You can pause your screen and go to a specific matchup if you'd like to. They're also in the description where you can click on them as well. And I am guaranteeing a reply to the first 3 comments of every video this year. So make sure you're subscribed and you've turned your notifications on. Let's jump into Thursday night football. We've got the Steelers at the Bengals. Sorry, I almost said Bears. Bengals. 41.5 point over under. The Steelers are heavy favorites. Not a surprise. I think the Bengals will be underdogs in most games this year. DK Metcalf, man. As someone who has not been very high on DK Metcalf, what we saw last week has been something that we've wanted to see this entire year. Even in a game where the Steelers were dominant, they heavily targeted DK Metcalf. He had 9 targets. That's incredible. We hadn't seen him get over 7 targets this entire year. He caught 4 of them for 95 yards and a touchdown. He continues to be the number 1 alpha in that offense. Now he faces the Bengals secondary that is completely Swiss cheese. So absolutely DK Metcalf is a must start this week. He and Aaron Rodgers definitely on the same page. Now on the opposite side of the ball, the Joe Flacco trade definitely had a positive impact on the Bengal wide receivers. You will see all my rankings for the wide receivers today. You'll see Jamar Chase is my wide receiver 2. Yes, I think we've seen enough to go ahead and say against a really good Green Bay Packers defense that Joe Flacco and Jamar Chase is going to be a very great connection this year. His first game with Joe Flacco, he had 12 targets, turned that into 94 yards and a touchdown, over 25 PPR points. You know, T. Higgins didn't get the same exact treatment, but still 8 targets. If you could guarantee 8 targets for T. Higgins for the rest of the year, you'd be very happy with that. He turned that only into 11 points, but he'll have his time in the end zone as well. What was very surprising with Joe Flacco is this team only had 1 sack given up. I thought Joe Flacco would have been on the ground all day against the Packers defense, but obviously he's a little bit of a quicker decision maker than Jake Browning is, so he can get the ball out and make quick decisions before the defense really has a chance to get him on the ground. So we're definitely going to play our Jamar Chases for the rest of the year back into that must-start elite category. And I think T. Higgins is also a spot start, right? Fine floor that he presents. He might not have the same upside as some other options on your lineup, so you'll have to look at your best ranked player in the video. But I think he's a fine option against the Steelers. Okay, let's jump into the London game. It's a 45.5 point over under the Rams at the Jaguars. And I think we need a moment of silence for any Puka Nacua owners out there like myself. It has been so hard to enjoy fantasy football this year, the amount of injuries I've had with my team. And another one bites the dust in Puka Nacua. Now, it's not a long-term injury, I get it, but it's every win right now is so important. You know, Stephania Bell mentioned that it's not going to be a long-term issue. Sean McVay technically hasn't ruled him out yet. He said he's day-to-day and his status is uncertain for the Jaguars game. So it's not a guarantee that he's going to miss time. Obviously, if he plays, he's going straight into your lineup. There's no doubt about that. But the most likely outcome here is that there is no Puka Nacua, which would make Davante Adams a very good start. Right? We would make Davante Adams our wide receiver 6, regardless if Puka Nacua plays or not. It's a great matchup because the Jags are the 7th best matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. However, if Puka Nacua misses time, both Jordan Whittington and Tutu Atwell become really interesting desperation plays off the waiver wire. Look, full transparency, I didn't think Tutu was going to come back this week with this hamstring injury. Now that he's back, it does make things a lot more complicated to predict. If I had to play one, it would be Jordan Whittington. I think he's the most obvious replacement in Puka Nacua's role. Not to say that he will be Puka Nacua, but we've seen in previous years, like last year without Puka Nacua, he had plenty of usable fantasy days. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, Brian Thomas, how about it, baby? We've been waiting for a day like this for Brian Thomas. Shout out to everybody who is a Brian Thomas stan like myself, who has been patient with him. He had 10 targets last week. We'd love to see that. And he turned those 10 targets into 8 catches, 90 yards, and a touchdown over 23 fantasy points. And he almost had another 50-yard touchdown, but Travis Hunter's foot was on the line, so it was called back. Probably would have been one of the craziest touchdowns of the year. But it looks like he and Trevor Lawrence are starting to build some real chemistry. Versus the Rams, you would anticipate this team needing to throw the ball for the vast majority of the game, right? I would be shocked if there's a point where this is not a competitive game for either side. So definitely going to be starting my Brian Thomases, my Devontae Adams, and then, names like Travis Hunter, Whittington, Atwell, they're fine desperation plays if you're in a tough spot. Okay, let's go to the start of the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games. Saints at Bears. It's a 45.5 point over under. The Bears are favored by 4.5 points. Chris Olave is going to be a must start. He almost got into the end zone last week. That touchdown was right there, but it was right on the fingertips and he couldn't quite bring it in. But Spencer Rattler's playing well. Last week, Chris Olave actually had his season high in receiving yards with 98. Now, it didn't turn into like the best fantasy day, but 98 receiving yards, 10 targets, 15.8 PPR points. We're talking about a top 20 wide receiver so far on the year through 6 weeks. He's been a reliable, safe floor, and now he gets a great matchup against the Bears, who are a top 10 matchup for your wide receivers. Rashid Shaheed is kind of like the Jameson Williams. Yeah, he could have a boom game, but he could also bust, so you got to be really careful with him. Now, for the Bears, I know it was a disappointing day for Rome Odunze, right? Only had 5 targets, caught 2 of them, but he did have a touchdown that was called back due to an illegal formation. So they're still trying to feature him not only in the red zone, but deep down the field. He has that chemistry with Caleb Williams. You're going to start him against the Saints, the 11th best matchup for your fantasy wide receivers. Now, here's the deal. I don't think DJ Moore is going to play this week, okay? He had to stay back in Washington after the game overnight in the DC area. So that injury, I just don't think he's going to probably be able to play this week. If I'm wrong, then I'm not sure you're even going to want to play him anyway. But the way my rankings are being shown is as if DJ Moore is going to miss the game. I think Luther Burden probably then becomes a desperation play at best. Maybe they'll feature him a little bit more. But here in this game, Luther Burden did not get, the Olamide Zacchaeus snaps, unfortunately. He still was very rarely used. But if DJ Moore, all of his opportunities are up for grabs, I could see Luther Burden having a decent game, if things go his way. Okay, let's jump to the Dolphins at the Browns. Jalen Waddle has been a reliable fantasy starter each and every week since the Tyreek Hill injury. And this one, he has 8 targets. Now, didn't turn it into like a huge fantasy day, but still, 8 targets is pretty decent. Obviously, we're coming off a week before this where he ended up getting into the end zone, caught 6 catches for 110 yards. This week, 6 catches, 95 yards. So 23 points and 15.8 points in the 2 weeks without Tyreek Hill. He's the number 1 weapon in the offense. He's a must start each and every week. On the opposite side of the ball, I just don't see a reason to tell you to start any of these Browns wide receivers. 13 targets for Jerry Jeudy. If I told you any player in the NFL got 13 targets last week, what would you say like the minimum points they probably got in PPR formats was? Like what, 12 PPR points? I mean, let's say like 10 at worst. Jerry Jeudy had 9.3 fantasy points, caught 5 of 13 targets. Not even a 50% catch rate. So that, targets are important, but when you're in this bad of an offense with Dylan Gabriel and Isaiah Bonzer, Jerry Jeudy, I just don't think you can trust any of these names. Okay, let's go to the Raiders at the Chiefs. So, Chiefs are heavy favorites, 10.5 point favorites. And finally, for the first time this year, we get to see Rashee Rice playing for the Kansas City Chiefs. I am so excited to see him out there. Such an elite fantasy asset last year before sustaining that knee injury. He's going to be out there. He's going to be full go, ready to play. I think Rice and Worthy are fantastic plays for the rest of the year. Rice is probably going to be more your Amon-Ra St. Brown. Worthy's probably going to be more your Jameson Williams, but maybe more consistent than Jameson Williams. And then you'll have weeks where Hollywood Brown kind of messes everything up for everyone, right? Chiefs head coach Andy Reid talked about these 3, saying, I think it's a positive thing. They haven't been on the field together other than training camp. I think they're looking forward to it. They're excited to play together. Those 3 are very close. So Patrick Mahomes, man, if anything, if you have Patrick Mahomes, he looks like a league winner this year. He really does. He's back to his MVP form. He has thrown the ball all over the field, rushing a ton for this offense as well. He and Baker Mayfield are some of the most exciting quarterbacks to watch in fantasy football right now. And now he gets Rashee Rice again. You got to start Rashee Rice coming back. You got to start Xavier Worthy coming back. It's a top 5 matchup against the Raiders for your fantasy wide receivers. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, Jacoby Myers continues to be underwhelming. It's like every single week, Jacoby Myers comes out here. Technically, he's the number 1 wide receiver, and technically it doesn't matter. right? He has like 7 fantasy points in each of his last 3 or 4 games. This game, he had 7.9 fantasy points, caught 4 of 4 targets for 39 yards. With Geno Smith, with this offense, there's just nothing good going on. Trey Tucker might actually be the better start at this point, right? I mean, Trey Tucker's at least showing you boom upside. I don't like either of these guys. It's not a good matchup versus the Chiefs. If you're playing them, I guess you're thinking through the matchup and saying, well, we're definitely going to see the Chiefs up in this game, so they're going to have to throw to somebody. But I don't really want to play the Raiders, to be honest. Okay, let's go to the Eagles at the Vikings. A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith are both spot starts. You have to think through games and ask yourself, will the Eagles need to throw? And then even if they need to throw, is it a good matchup? Because, I mean, last week they needed to throw against the Giants. It was a decent matchup. And, you know, this passing attack is just putrid right now. Jalen Hurts can't throw the ball beyond 5 yards accurately. You know, he missed Devonta Smith on a 85-yard touchdown last week. A.J. Brown, you know, is being a little bit of a diva, to be honest, and, you know, not really converting on all of his opportunities either. But I think these are both guys that you can put into your lineup and expect a high ceiling, but a very low floor on a week-to-week basis. The good news is it's in Minnesota, so it's in a dome. And if it's in Minnesota, there's obviously a possibility that the Vikings are in control of this game and the A.J. Browns and Devonta Smiths are needed. My wide receiver 24 and my wide receiver 29, both flexible names. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, J.J. McCarthy is going to practice in some capacity this week. That doesn't sound like he's going to start, so it's probably going to be Carson Wentz. Justin Jefferson must start. Jordan Addison, a flexible name, just like Devonta Smith. So both of those guys are, you know, good to go in your lineups. Okay, let's go to the Panthers at the Jets. 43.5 point over under. Tetairoa McMillan is the only lock in this matchup, point blank period. I don't really want to mess around with anyone else. Justin Fields is throwing the ball. That's enough for you to, well, we don't need to talk about the Jets, right? Justin Fields is throwing the ball. He had 47 passing yards last week. And Garrett Wilson is not going to play in this game, right? He'll be out a couple weeks. Outside of that, you can't start anyone outside of Tetairoa McMillan in this game, man. You just can't. Now, look, guys, injuries have been chaotic this year. The NFL fantasy football has had so many of them. If you want to know my latest up-to-date rankings, both for weekly and rest of season, then all you have to do is use my promo code LAND and buy the season pass on the Flock site. That will give you unlimited access, not only to the site, the rankings, the trade calculator, all the great premium tools, but it will also give you some vouchers to come on our live stream and ask us fantasy questions. So check that out in the pinned comment. Okay, let's go to the Patriots at the Titans. 41.5 point over under. The Titans are underdogs by about 6.5 points, even though it's in Tennessee. Calvin Ridley is going to miss some time. And we just found out that the Titans are firing their head coach, Brian Callahan. And as well as the offensive coordinator is moving on. So all the play calling duties are going to go to someone else. And I don't think that's a negative. That can only be a positive. It's not like this offense has looked good anyway. But Alec Manor is a desperation play if you want to rationalize like, hey, new play caller, maybe they want to get Alec Manor more involved. But I don't think anything's really predictable with this offense right now. So I would prefer to stay away from it entirely. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, we finally thought that we knew what the offense looked like in New England. We finally thought it was clear. Okay, you can start Diggs every week. He's going to be the guy. The Booty experience, the DeMar Douglas experience, those are over. And then last week, the complete opposite happens, right? Boutte leads the wide receiver room in snaps, routes run, and targets. Obviously turns that into, 2 receiving touchdowns, 93 yards. Yeah. And then Stephon Diggs had just 3 targets. You know, caught 3 of them for 28 yards. Yes, he had the deep down the field OPI call. That would have helped his fantasy day, but you should still be concerned even if that play happened or not, because they are showing that they're more than willing to spread the ball out in New England. Demario Douglas, 4 targets, 3 catches, 71 yards, and a touchdown. Almost had 2 touchdowns. So it's really difficult to say what this wide receiver room is going to look week in, week out. There is going to be a good wide receiver in fantasy football every week. I just don't think you're going to know who it is. But if I had to bet, I'm going to bet on Stephon Diggs being the most consistent guy week in and week out. Okay, let's jump to the start of the afternoon slate of games. We've got the Giants at the Broncos. 40.5 point over under. The Broncos are favored by about 7 points at home. I think Wanda Robinson is a fine play. Obviously, we saw him on Thursday Night Football being the best target for Jackson Dart, who looks electric right now. He caught 6 of 7 targets for 84 yards and a touchdown. I wouldn't expect him to have that big, broken play down the sideline each and every week, but he's a really safe floor play. And he's probably not going to get covered by Patrick Surtain because they'll use him in and out of the slot. On the opposite side of the ball, it's a great time for Courtland Sutton to have a bounce back game. The Giants are the 3rd best matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. Don't lose hope in Courtland Sutton. I know it was a bad game last week, but to be honest, even when the Broncos were down after the safety in London, they were down by 1 point. It never felt like they were going to lose that game. It never felt like that. They were constantly running the ball. The offense was a little bit lethargic. I think they'll be more intentional with Courtland Sutton this week against the Giants. Okay, moving on to the Colts at the Chargers. 48.5 point over under. The Chargers are favored by about 1.5 points, so it's a very close spread. Another wide receiver room where we think the first 4 weeks tells us the full story, and that's just not the case. Now, obviously, in this game, Quentin Johnson did not play. You saw a lot of Trey Harris, but Ladd McConkey led the way with this 8 targets, turning those 8 targets into 7 catches, 100 yards, and a touchdown. Keenan Allen had 7 targets, didn't do much with it, wasn't used heavily down the field, didn't get used in the red zone. But here's how I view this wide receiver room. If I had to start one this week because of Johnston's injury, it would be Ladd McConkey. It's a high over-under. The Colts are a great offense. There should be a need to throw the ball throughout this game. But I do think Johnston and Keenan Allen are safe floor plays as well if they're healthy each and every week. There might be a little bit of Russian roulette situation here. Ladd could let you down. Quentin, Keenan, these guys can let you down any given week, but they also have the upside to win you your week. So typically they have to be in your lineup. And it's a great matchup against the Colts, in which should be a high-scoring affair. On the opposite side of the ball, Michael Pittman. In the last couple of weeks, we have seen Josh Downs get more and more involved in this offense. Tyler Warren really is the number 1 receiver here, but Pittman this week had just 3 targets, only turned that into 4 fantasy points. Josh Downs, 6 catches, 42 yards, and a touchdown. I still trust Michael Pittman more than any other receiver in this offense. He's my wide receiver 28 this week, but it will be a little bit more spread out than I think we want it to be in fantasy football. Ultimately, Tyler Warren is really the most consistent guy in this offense in the receiving game. Okay, let's go to Packers at Cardinals. Romeo Doubs had a fine day last week. It didn't turn into anything like fantastic. He had 9 targets, caught 5 of them for 55 yards. And then we finally see Matthew Golden getting involved after the bye week. He played 69% of the snaps, had 5 targets, caught 3 of them for 86 yards. That's encouraging to see. Dontavion Wicks dealing with an injury. Jaden Reed dealing with an injury. We don't know at the time of recording this if Christian Watson will be back or not. But if all those guys are out, then Doubs and Golden are actually pretty decent starts this week and a very good offense. On the opposite side of the ball, you will not have Marvin Harrison Jr. in this game. He just won't be available. That type of concussion, the way his head hit the ground, he's going to be out at least a week, and then they have their bye week after that. Now, the Cardinals, I hope they start Jacoby Brissett again. Zay Jones was the number 1 target for Jacoby Brissett. He had 7 targets. He turned those 7 targets into 5 catches and 79 yards. If I had to start any of these guys, it would be Zay Jones this week. But there's a very low floor for all these guys. They could easily all be the reason you lose your week. Okay, let's jump into the Commanders at the Cowboys. In my opinion, this is where the most points for fantasy wide receivers will come from in any game this entire week. Okay, I am projecting Terry McLaurin to be back. He'll be ranked as my wide receiver 18, Deebo Samuel as my wide receiver 14. A little bit of an underwhelming game for Deebo on Monday Night Football. Obviously, the weather had a little bit of part to play in that, and the turnovers for the Commanders. But if Terry McLaurin is ruled out, Deebo becomes a top 10 wide receiver. This is in Dallas, so weather will not be an issue. This is against one of the best offenses in the NFL in Dallas. Best matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. Number 1 matchup. Best for your wide receiver. So you can start both of those guys. On the opposite side of the ball, CeeDee Lamb and George Pickens are both must starts. Now, I can't tell you today if CeeDee Lamb will play, but according to Stephen Jones, he says that CeeDee Lamb could potentially play this week against the Commanders. So obviously I'm ranking them as if Lamb is playing. And if Lamb is playing, both him and Pickens are fine plays this week. You can start both of those guys. Now, if CeeDee Lamb is out, George Pickens becomes my wide receiver 6, one of the best weapons in fantasy football right now. He and Dak Prescott, man, it is so fun watching that connection. So either way, it's the highest over under the week, or at least tied for it. Bunch of fantasy studs for wide receivers. I mean, I cannot wait to see this game. You should see a ton of points for fantasy football. Okay, let's go to Sunday Night Football. Drake London almost had 2 touchdowns before the half last Monday Night Football against the Bills. He and Michael Penix finally in that kind of synergy that we all wanted to see. Hyper targeting Drake London. You got to start him. It doesn't matter what the matchup is at this point. On the opposite side of the ball, we don't know if Brock Purdy's going to play or not. We don't know if Ricky Pearsall's going to play or not. The hope is that they can practice this week. So if I were a betting man, I would bet on it being Mac Jones starting and no Ricky Pearsall. Now, we also found out later that Juwan Jennings is playing with like multiple broken ribs. I wish we knew that last week. That would have been very important for us to know. So, assuming Mac Jones is starting and assuming no Ricky Pearsall, Kendrick Bourne becomes a great flexible name. He has 142 receiving yards in back-to-back weeks. Now, you have to keep in mind, though, that number one, if Ricky Pearsall is active, then Pearsall is probably the number one guy. Number two, if Brock Purdy plays, there may not be the same connection between him and Kendrick Bourne. And number three, if George Kittle plays, because all reports are that he's going to practice this week and he could play in this game, then even George Kittle being out there could limit the upside of a Kendrick Bourne. But again, assuming we're in the safe spot where it's Mac Jones starting, no Ricky Pearsall, then Kendrick Bourne is one of the better flex options out there this week. All right, we've got a Monday Night Football doubleheader again this week, starting with the Bucs at the Lions. This is tied with the Commanders and the Cowboys for the highest over-under of the week. For the Bucs, things get a little bit messy. Emeka Egbuka is not going to play this week with that hamstring injury. And the way you're seeing my rankings is as if Mike Evans and Egbuka are all ruled out. Now, we already know that the head coach has told us Godwin is not going to play this week, right? So we know that. We know that piece of information. So if there is no Egbuka, no Godwin, that's pretty much guaranteed, and no Mike Evans, which is possible, then Sterling Shepard becomes one of my favorite flexible names. Now, that doesn't mean that I can guarantee you that Sterling Shepard is going to be the best receiver in this receiving room. Last week, they spread the ball out all over the field. Tez Johnson had 3 targets. Cameron Johnson had 4 targets. Sterling Shepard had 3. So it was pretty much spread out all over the field. If I had to choose one of these names, I'm choosing Sterling Shepard just because he's the most veteran name. He has the most inbuilt chemistry with Baker Mayfield. But at the same time, I couldn't tell you between Sterling Shepard and these other names who scores the most points. So if you want to play a little Russian roulette, you can do that. It's a high matchup. The Bucs should need to throw the ball. These wide receivers should be necessary. Now, if Mike Evans is active, it makes everything way more clear. You start Mike Evans and you sit all those other names, right? It's just, he would be the dominant guy in my opinion. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, what was awesome to see is finally we did see Jameson Williams more involved in the Detroit Lions offense. Last week, Jameson Williams had 7 targets. Obviously, Amon-Ra still had his, but Jameson Williams had 7 targets. He turned those 7 targets into 6 catches, 66 yards, and a touchdown. That was awesome to finally see. Now, this is the upside of a Jameson Williams. He can score a touchdown and win you your week, or he can bust. We know that's possible, but in such a high over-under, I would like to put him in my lineups if I don't have a clear, better option. I want that, upside infused into my lineups each and every week. And of course, Amon-Ra St. Brown is in your lineup every single game. So just before we get into our last matchup of the day, here are 6 players I'm rocking with in my DFS lineup this week. Debo and JCM at Dallas. It's the best matchup for your fantasy wide receivers. Obviously, we don't know Terry's status at the time of recording this. Bill Krosky-Merritt, I think he's going to bounce back after a career-high touches last week, but a disappointing game. Rashee Rice, first game back. Adunze with DJ Moore being injured, and then obviously a safe 4 with Taylor and CMC. That's what I'm rocking with. You can create your own lineup on the Quick 6 Super Slam contest. All you got to do is download the FastDraft app, use my promo code LAND. I'll match your deposit up to $50, and then you're going to get my Week 7 rankings completely free. So you can check that out in the pinned comment if you want to have some fun. Okay, the last game of the week, Texans at Seahawks, 41.5 point over under. The Seahawks are favored by 3 points. This one is very simple in my mind. I don't think we need to talk about it too much in depth. Nico Collins, right into your lineup. All right, I know it's been disappointing, but coming off the bye week, the Seahawks have a lot of injuries to their secondary as well. He should have a very good day. What I will say is it will be interesting to see if Jaden Higgins or Jalen Noel get a post-bye rookie bump. Could they get more involved? Could we see Hutchinson go away or Kirk go away? That's something I'm keeping my eye on, but you certainly can't bet on it right now in your lineups. And then on the opposite side of the ball, Jackson Smith-Njigba, man, he is just blossoming into one of the best wide receivers in fantasy football, point blank period. Back-to-back weeks over 130 yards through the air, 27 points in week 5, 30 points in week 6, touchdowns in 3 out of his last 4 matchups. They're using him down the field, in the slot, boundary, everywhere they're using JSN. So you got to put him into your lineups. But guys, I appreciate you watching the video. Do me a favor, hit the like button to show some love, subscribe if you like the content, and the running back video is already out on the channel if you want to check it out. Draft with me every night this week on the FastDraft app, where there are thousands of dollars to be won weekly. Getting started is easy. Download the FastDraft app, use the promo code LAND at signup to get your deposit match up to $50. That's up to 10 free entries on us. And when you finish your first DFS contest, I'll send you my weekly rankings completely free. Check out the link in the pinned comment to start drafting today.